Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This video is looking at Crush, which is a freebie from Tritic, not really sure how to pronounce it, never actually heard it spoken. They're a manufacturer who I think I've seen or heard of before, but they've managed to stay unusually quiet as a name, which I think, at least with regards to a couple of their devices, is a bit of a shame because they've got some real dark horses in here. Now, before we go a lot further and get into what the device is and what it does and all of that, actually, I'll just give you a quick preview. Here's the most common use that you hear. Making drums sound like they have turned into Cocoa Pops, which leads me to the thing that I should cover. I hate bit crushing. It's not an effect or a process that I particularly like or see a massive amount of value in. However, that does not mean that I don't believe it should exist. I've actually used it a couple of times in my own tracks for very specific effects. Like there's a track on an album of mine, Arcades, I think it's called Time Pilots, which starts with something that sounds like a Z80 tabletop computer game, a video game from the early 80s, hence the title of the track. And if we step back just a review or two, Tel Mod, if you had paid attention to the drum bus, because all the drums were made with Mod, if you'd paid attention to the drum bus, I actually used Tel's bit crushing thing, his device, to put the drums into a specific space. But in terms of that kind of turning everything to snap, crackle and pop, I don't do it. It's not my thing, and I didn't enjoy it when I started hearing it all over music. You know, it's like Nine Inch Nails records, and it's just nothing but bit crushing. And I'm all for creative kinds of distortions, but just personally, I don't see a lot of benefit in this, and a major reason why I have issues with bit crushing is simply because it's so massively overused. It's like the lazy way to pretend you're doing something good. Rather than actually making an interesting drum line, you get like a sample from somewhere, you splat it, and then you say, oh no, that's really creative. But all you've done is filled the space with splat rather than filling the space with art. That's my problem with it. That doesn't mean that I can't look at this with the merit of what it is, but if you do feel that I have some sort of antipathy towards the idea of just crushing everything and making it sound chewed up, that's why. Don't let that be taken as something that has to change what you do. So let's look, what is bit crushing? Bit crushing is a negative outcome as a result of sampling. Sampling is a very intense process. Sorry, just trying to zero this as we speak. It's a very intensive process that has some negative outcomes. And through the decisions made, particularly with low bitrate, high bitrate stuff, bit crushing is irrelevant, despite what people try and tell you. If you have that question about, oh, but if I don't sample and run my everything at like stupidly high bit rates, go watch Dan Worrell's videos on this very issue. There's even a really good section inside the Fruity Loops manual, Fruity Studio, sorry, date myself there, in the Fruity manual about how a lot of this stuff about bit rates is just, well, it's a bit strange. So bit crushing is simply the inevitable result of running at low bit rates or low sample rates or a combination thereof. So early samplers, while all the theory was well sorted from even going back into the 50s, they knew about the concept of digital sampling, but it was hard to do. The technology just wasn't there to support it easily, and then suddenly by the early to mid 80s, we'd got access to children's toys that were able to sample, or to, not to sample, but to play back recordings. But to keep it affordable, then they used a low bit rate, like say maybe a 12 or an 8-bit rate, and really quite low sample rates. It's the combination of the sample rate and the bit rate that gives us the result. But basically speaking, in all practical terms, not emotive terms, once you hit the combination of a 44.1k bit rate, a 16k bit rate with a 44.1k sample rate, it's indistinguishable. People will try and tell you otherwise, but they're entitled to whatever they want to believe, but it doesn't make it true. So bit crushing is turning the failure of early sample rates, or the limited success of early sample rate technology, which was fully understood at the time, into a process effect. So really just what happened was that people started out using 12-bit samplers, and they liked the kind of crushed sound that they ended up with, and then wanted to carry forward with it and felt like they missed that when they moved into digital and things were clean. So they set to wanting to make them sound, well, bad again. So moving forward, who are these people? These people, with regards to this review, there's Crush, which is a tasty bit crusher with some extra little bits and pieces, and it's free. They say that they've kind of got it perfect. I think the whole thing with bit crushing is that it has to be imperfect. I do believe that Crush has a sound, because to me it seems to feel different from other bit crushers that I've used. Not saying whether that's right or wrong. They simply have made decisions, because invariably what happens is that people want the bit crushy thing, but they don't want the negatives that come with the bit crushy thing, so the manufacturers tend to smooth it all off and make it sound nice and safe. Fair enough, I see the logic in that. It's actually the leader for a fancier version with some extra wave shaping, ring modulation, and more modulation, LFOE type stuff. What really grabs me about them as a manufacturer is that they've got a couple of very, very digital effects, which are very open about what they are, that take in the sound, slice it into 1,000 pieces, and then spit it out in various ways. One of them is weighted towards reverbs, but the one that really appealed to me is Mutech, I think, Mu something or other, which becomes a resonator, so you can use it to create the feeling that any sound has a resonance board, kind of like the wooden front on your guitar, which resonates when you play them strings. Same with a piano. There's that great big wooden board underneath the strings, which resonates and gives us the sound, right the way through to having sounds come in and making them sound like plucked guitars and what have you. It's a rather fascinating effect, and I'm not sure whether there's much competitor for it to be fascinated. So the device that we're looking at here, however, is, of course, the Crush device. Oh, Moodle. There we go. Moodle. Strange name, but that's well worth a look if you're into real getting in and doing sound designing. It's not a thing that you necessarily want to go applying to all of your vocals to make them sound natural, because they'll probably sound rather strange. Although I'm sure you could do very fascinating things creatively with it. So, Bit Crusher, downsampling algorithms. As I said, I think that they are, while they say the crispy taste of digital, the warmth of its drive stage, I think that they have rounded off the true crispiness of bit crushing to give us a safe sound. But it is a sound of its own, and if it works for you in what you're doing, there ain't nothing wrong with it whatsoever. There are also these extra modulation effects. So we might as well start to take a little bit of a look. I will look through drums, and which is the common thing, and I know everyone will be like, well, what's this? But in reality, I'm more interested always in synths. So, drums. This is clean. This is the default. So when we turn on the device, this is what's going to happen. Now, I do have some caveats with regards to what happens here, or how it happens. I know it's a free device, but I still have some caveats. So we turn this on. couple of things have happened. We've gained level, and they're obviously aware of that potential to gain level because they've dropped this by 3. We're getting a combination of dry and wet. Unusual choice. But they haven't shed all of the level that they know they're adding. So you turn it on, it's rolling off a lot of tops and getting a little bit louder. Therefore, instantly you go, wow, that sounds good. Okay, yeah, sure, it does. Anything that's louder, especially if it's rolled off some aggressive high end, will sound like it's been improved. Has it really? Apart from the volume boost, which gives us the impression of the sound becoming bigger and splashier, and there is no difference once we turn all the circuits off. Okay, great, that's how it should be, but just really watch your levels. So if we go 0 dB and get rid of the dry, I don't notice any difference now. So with nothing happening, it seems to be clean. Great, and our levels do seem to match at that point. Working through what it does, it has a drive on the front end. Now the problem we've got here is the more we push the drive, the better we think it sounds because it's getting louder. And I really do wonder why in a device like that, these days, there isn't some sort of attempt. Now, I've spoken about this before, and in some cases, I'm pretty broad about balancing drive. But because I know how people use these things, I know that there's a great tendency to make unwise decisions based on an unwise understanding or a lack of understanding. The more we push that drive, the better it sounds simply because everything's got louder. It is also starting to compress because it's just chopping off what it can't put within its range. And that's okay, that's part of the effect, but if we pull our level back, let's put ourselves into play, just using these meters, which are pretty broad, suddenly the difference is not as great as you think it is. Doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong, but just really watch your levels here, because otherwise what will happen is you will start here, you'll turn everything up super loud, but it doesn't actually sound good. It just sounds over loud. Let's pull this back. See, it doesn't actually sound better anymore, it sounds worse. Now that's not the fault of the device as such, so I'm not complaining about their drive algorithm, which I actually think is quite nice, but just a lack of anything to compensate gain as we are adding it strikes me as unwise. I wouldn't mind at all if there were a button that says, here, let us approximate evening your gain out, or wing it. But the fact that there isn't one, and I know it's free, but I don't notice there being one on the paid version either. So be very, very careful when using it, that you're not just adding level going, oh, it's louder, therefore it sounds better. Because if that's the case, you might as well just get the level control and do that to it, because it's going to be the same. But when you come to export it, it'll be like the track that I listened to this morning, some guy's retro wave track, which was like mastered at probably plus 12 dB. There was no movement on the meters and everything was just Splatsville. But he was new to it and what have you, and at least he'd been a little bit open about that, but it sounded awful. Just awful. You don't want to do that. It's not about being judgy, it's just about there's a certain point beyond which you're creative and are just going downhill without realizing. It's like when you drink alcohol, you think that you get smarter and smarter the more you drink, when in reality from the outside you are getting sillier and sillier. So drive does add quite a nice sort of, just is kind of body boost. It doesn't particularly go into ripping distortion, although I'm sure if you drive enough signal into the front end of it, it will do that. But it's a nice sort of just bulk up kind of sound. So it's a nice choice with regards to drive. I would have the impression again that there's probably something across the circuit that just softens the top end. That's fine. That's the whole idea. It says it's going to make things warm. The reason for the drive we'll get into a little bit later. The next thing we've got is crush and DWSP. Thankfully, they do tell us down below which of these is which. Fancy, clever naming. Okay, yep, seems real hipster, but it would be better to just go put bit rate or rate and sample rate rather than giving them weird fancy names. Now, as the bit rate goes down, then we've got far less capacity to fill things in. With our bit rate, and this is speaking incredibly broadly, so please don't be some kind of Captain Obvious who has to come along and point out technical inaccuracies. As I said right from the beginning, if you want to know the real technique and the technical properly, start with Dan Worrell. There's that great bit in the Fruity manual, and you can actually go and read about the proper things on Wikipedia or go get a book on real DSP. I'm just trying to give you a hack version of what's likely to happen. Basically, we're reducing our dynamic range. So that's why you'll find that certain things play and other bits just kind of drop out. So the loud bits still play, the quiet bits just get lost. So it just gets mighty choppy because there just isn't enough sampling happening, like there aren't enough slices happening in more the vertical realm to be able to accommodate it. A little bit, and you get a kind of noise. There's like background noise that comes in. Not so much on drums because they're too transient, but on sounds that have any length, you'll often get this moving whine, which personally I loathe, because it's fine if you're wanting to make robot noises. But if you're trying to do something that seems flowing or human in any way, and remember art's about human, then just be careful. The other one is the sample rate. Now the sample rate is the one that works this way. It's saying how many times do we record, take a snapshot of what's coming in time. So depth, time. And this reduces that. And this is where you get that 8-bit kind of feel very quickly. Because there are essentially gaps between the audio. So it's like a strobe in a disco where you'd see someone move like this, simply because you get the strobe speed right with regards to the human bit rate, the human sample rate, and we end up only seeing things move like this rather than the feeling of something smooth. So this is just basically stripping out sections of time. In terms of labels, I'm also annoyed by the fact that these don't give us any useful feedback. What is this? What rate is this? I have no idea. They're not telling us. Now, maybe that's just because they don't know what rate I'm going to be running my host at. Now, if they're super smart these days, they can probably get that info. In which case, they can change what gets fed back to me. So if they know I'm in 1644, then they can say 16-bit, 15, 14, 13, 12. Yeah, good luck with that. As they can go 44.1, 22. Yeah, look, you're an idiot. Or, if they don't have option for both, then they could simply label it with both. The fact that they've just gone with percentages kind of annoys me, because what if I do want to emulate that? If I really want bit crushing, I tend to want to emulate a very specific thing. So let's say I wanted 8-bit 11K. I have no idea where that is going to be on here. Thank you. Obviously, it's not that. So, yeah, I can use my feelings But couldn't you have given me some actual emulation functionality by giving me readouts? Just seems a bit whatever. But in terms of what they do work, and the sound is as well, it's not as nasty as one would expect. That's probably the fairest way of putting it. It's not as nasty as one would expect because, again, I say they've smoothed things out. Now, back to Drive. This sounds very choppy and a bit hard to use. If we actually push this into Drive, see how that actually evens out. So let's take just this one. See? So because we're actually reducing our available bandwidth, what we can do with regards to time, if we push it hard into this, we're actually reducing the amount of level information. So it's just like if you turn the level up, then all the loud bits go above the dotted line, and therefore it's more likely to actually give us a result. What it's doing is just saying, okay, we will crush your dynamic, which makes it easier for this to hear it, which is part of why the whole loudness war occurred, because as people are using laptop speakers and what have you to listen to music, it's just far easier to make those speakers sound passable when your music is overcompressed and over loud. Then it's far more likely to give you a workable result. So that's the official reason for the drive on the front end. If you don't want to use this drive, just put in another device that's somehow limiting, compressing, limiting, brutalizing the input. And as you heard there, once we get the drive real high, we can go with high crush and what have you. And get that MPC, Public Enemy kind of sound and feel. Again, watch your levels. Try to make sure they match. Now that actually, within the concept of what we're looking for, if we're looking to sound like Public Enemy, nothing really wrong with that. I wasn't a massive fan, but there's some really impressive work in there. Like Fight the Power it's frightening, and that's meant to be. It's great work. Then we can add in a filter. The filter can operate as a low pass or as a high pass, and it remembers its settings from one mode to another. We can that's ringing because of the resonance. I believe that is post process. I say I believe because I looked for a manual and couldn't find one. Simply they've laid it out here, which would indicate that drive into crush into filter. Fair enough, that's generally the way you would want it. But there are times where you might say, let's reduce the amount of information that's going into this crusher so it can behave differently. In which case, you might put your own filter between. That works well. It's pretty easy to get a pleasing sound. You don't have to do much work to get rid of the nastiness that is inherent in bit crushing, because as I say, they've put the filtering in there already, which is both good and bad. It's good in the sense that it makes the device super easy to use. It's bad in the sense that you are limited to the decisions they made. Whether that's a terrible thing is a whole other thing. Now let's take the bit crushing out of the experience for the moment and just look at, okay, what would we do? Why would we use this kind of thing if we're not looking to sound like Nine Inch Nails? I've given you an example there of very heavy processing to give us that, well, what people referred to as tape feel these days of a Public Enemy kind of a thing. But let's say we didn't want to be that heavy-handed. Let's say we had gotten ourselves a drum loop like this. And the problem is that it just sounds far too clean. It sounds like a sample loop in a DAW. We drop that into our piece, we might very easily go, oh, but it's so clean, man, it's like so present. And then when you come to mix it, you will have a lot of problems. Your piece will never really gel, and you'll also have a lot of problems with your vocals. Your vocals will struggle to fit in. Why? Because you've got that hi-hat going right up here. Your hi-hat is actually above your singer. Your singer's here and your hi-hat is here. And I don't mean in level, I mean in frequency. So your hi-hat is actually above your singer. If you've got someone singing a song, it's probably because they should be in front of the band and the band behind them. So, options is that we can look at just a filter. Now that straight away is going to work better. You might think, oh, but if I A-B them, then I prefer it without the filter. Of course you do. Of course you do, because you think, oh, the more clarity, the better. But it's going to cause you a lot of issues, as I said. This is actually going to fit in fairly nicely. Maybe a little dull. That's putting some impact back in. We might brighten that a little bit. We might even consider upping our resonance just a little. It is taking away some of the bass, but the last thing you want is a of bass. I get to see plenty of rapper type mixes where there's just far too much bass, and all you hear when you listen to it is, and I don't mean before you're listening to it in the sub in their mate's car. They think that a huge amount of bass makes a rap mix. Don't get that it's actually no more bass in a rap mix than there is in a rock mix, and often far less real bass than there is in a jazz mix with an upright bass. Those things are... It's about perception. So this has given us a kit that's going to sit very nicely behind the rest of our piece. It's going to behave well, and that's part of why the whole Public Enemy thing and what have you, they didn't have much instrumentation, but that crushing worked so well because it allowed them to have a huge sound whilst actually keeping it very contained so that Chuck and Flav could on top of it. Now let's add a little bit of crushing, but we're going to add these as though more that they were some kind of wave shape or distortion than their devices. A little bit of crush. That's too much. If it sounds like it's going like it's blowing its nose, you have really messed it up. It's going to sound very, very unpleasant to any listener who is not, well, you. And that's not the good path that you want to go down. If you think you're hearing that on other people's records, firstly check to see how successful the record is. If it's just other people in your forum where everybody does that, okay, that's fine. It's a creative choice. But if you're looking at records that have really sold quite well, if we're talking rap, let's pick Eminem. How many of his tracks sound like this? I will guess, and only guessing here, basically none. So go carefully. You can add a little bit of the feeling of noise. Let's get that filter out of the way. You know how you can hear noise there? It's a bit much. Let's pull it back. Once you can hear it, as you're turning it down, you'll be able to follow it down and still hear it. But let's say that's enough. So that's just adding a little sense of almost room into here. And now let's take the sample rate back. Until we get into the nasty arena, that's largely like a filter. It's sort of changing our balance. So it sounds a little bit gruntier, a little bit meaner. We've still got quite a lot of high end here. And we're not going to know where that should be until we actually have the other elements, which is part of why I'm prone to mixing the voices first, so that I know what is going to work underneath them. But if you're going to mix your drums first and not fall for filling the room with your drum sound, leaving no space for your poor singer, then just be aware that you probably need to come and finesse it at the end, but at least by rolling some off, so that you don't feel like you're unwilling to sacrifice that treble when you're struggling with the singer, and then forcing more treble and forcing all kinds of weird things onto the singer, making them seem stranger and stranger, so you can hang on to these drums that you've got your ego attached to. But that's probably good work. We focused that drum kit down, made it sound quite cool, mean. That's good. There is the option with this device to obviously run wet and dry. For anyone who follows me, you know I'm not a fan of mixing distorted signal with undistorted signal. I'm sort of a pick which way you're going, buddy. Are you on this side of the fence or are you on that side of the fence? If you're on that side of the fence, go there. I'm not a fan of the mix. I know it's done, and I have done it from time to time, but it's not really the best way of handling things. I don't think you get a best of both worlds. I think you just get a strange, I'm too much of a producer, rather than here's some beautiful music. Next feature that we do have is this LFO. There is one LFO with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 destinations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can use this one LFO to modulate any or all of these, but they will all move the same with each other. Now, if you've got a good DAW with a good LFO modulation system, like Reason or Bitwig, and others are coming along with modulation systems as well, then there's absolutely no reason why you can't get 27 other modulators, LFOs, what have you, and attach them to stuff. I'll leave that to you for knowing your own DAW. We can run in a free mode. Let's pick the obvious, being our frequency. Look how these behave. It's an interesting choice. Normally when you assign an LFO, it will tend to go both above and below, what's called bipolar. So it'll rise above the initial position and fall below the initial position and keep doing that. In this, it's unipolar upside down. Unipolar normally means it's like an envelope, it'll rise. So we started here and the envelope will rise. This is like starting here and try to arrange my hand in a useful way and then falling. So it's taking our existing position and falling. Now I can see a reason to do this. I can see their logic, and it's okay, but unusual in the sense that they're saying, well, you can set the highest you want this to go, and then you can set how far you want it to fall. Interesting. Is it a right decision, wrong decision? Don't know, just different. But I've then got some issues. This reads out as a percent. Watch what happens when I lower this. This gets smaller and smaller. I don't see any sense in that. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. To get the same amount of movement, if I essentially said I want this modulation to move by, let's say, 1 octave, I would want that 1 octave movement wherever I went. If I moved this down lower and said, oh no, that octave is not the right amount now, then I would adjust here. By having this adjust all of its own accord for its own logic. So if we're down here, to get the smallest amount of movement, I've got to put a huge amount of modulation on. It's strange. But it does work. So we can apply modulation and put that free form. Now this is interesting. This is a thing that people often don't think to do. Hear how we've now got a sense of movement in our hi-hats. Because we've added a groove that's most noticeable on the frequency cutoff, which is around the hi-hats. So that adds a kind of a groove. Now you can add that in a sync, but the trouble is it doesn't sound very good. Whereas this, it takes our repetitive drum pattern and its cycle is different from the cycle of the drum pattern. Therefore, it starts to move and become a different kind of funky. You don't want to overdo that. It's easy to do. But if you want to hear what's really happening, turn up your resonance so you can actually hear the movement, and then pull it back. It creates this kind of groovin', movin' sort of a thing. That's a nice thing about this kind of approach, and the fact that you've got your LFO built in means you can start to do that quite easily. Now, you're not just tied to the one thing, because we can look at adding a little bit of drive, a little bit of crush, and we have to add a lot more crush and drive because we've only got small values, which is why it's annoying. So if I wanted what might read as, let's say, 5% here, I have to add 100% here. That's not logical. Now that drum loop actually feels quite vibrant. It's not the same as having Ian Pace or Bill Bruford in your room. Don't fool yourself of this ever. But it's a way of taking this obvious loop, not to turn it into a real drummer, but to turn it into something that's organic, as in it moves within its own situation. It's like a bird in a cage is not a free bird. It's still a bird in a cage, but there's a difference between a plastic bird in a cage and a real bird in a cage. We would generally rather the real bird till we have to clean up the mess. So this is why real birds in cages tend to outsell plastic birds in cages. You can create all this kind of movement. Again, you can sync your LFO shape, but just please be very cautious, because you're probably going to undo the thing you think you're doing. You're looking for greater movement in the big picture, not one bar of music. If you think you're making one bar of perfect music that you can then copy and paste out, you're sunk already, because people don't listen to one minute of a song, or if they do, they're irrelevant. People are listening to 3.5 minutes of a song, a whole song, and how it moves and changes across the whole song is what counts. And if you set yourself up so that you've got one perfect minute, you're not interested in music, you're interested in playing with technology. That's fine, but just be honest with yourself about that. So, very flat drum loop, kind of funky drum loop. Cool. Now we'll look at essentially the same thing, only with a synthesizer. There's no data here. Let's just make sure we've got a focus. Here's the sound. Just watch our levels. Turn the device on. We've got the same problem straight away in that it obviously adds level. And it takes a lot of sparkle. That's that filter, easily. So at 20, the filter seems to be out of the game. So a filter. It's a polite digital filter. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. You don't want necessarily too much of a characterful filter at this point. Drive. does add a kind of a sense of presence or reality to it. In this case, yeah, it's rolling off some of the highs, some of the perfect digitalness of this synth. We're losing some of that right up top, which is attractive, but actually will cause problems in a mix, so that's nice. We'll look at what happens with Crush. You can hear hiss, but you can also hear like a intermodulation distortion, so you can often hear it inside the sound. You might need decent speakers, or God forbid headphones, but this is what headphones are for. They're not designed for mixing, they're designed to be able to put on and hear if there's something going on in there that you otherwise don't want, and play with your own sounds. And if, as you turn that up, or in any sort of situation where you're working with digital stuff, you might suddenly hear this sort of glug, 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 or real, as you've got kinds of digital distortions coming in. But a little bit of crushing's not entirely a terrible thing. It's a little... How's your father up top, because we start to end up with some Nyquist issues, along with other things. But again, a little bit and some drive helps even those things out. And add in some movement. Again, with the percentage thing, I'd not use this device, to be perfectly blunt. It would put me off because of these, that I can't put the same amount here to get the same amount of movement on each knob. While that may be a good thing in the sense that it means that people aren't going to end up with the same amount of movement on every knob, I'd rather be able to say I've got 5% or 1 octave's worth of movement. So then I can look at all of them and go, oh gee, I've got all these knobs in the same spot. What a kind of a dill am I? They need to be in different spots. Now we can hear that a little bit, but compared to... which is just... Europa is actually a really great synth, but like any of these things, you need to put the time in. That's just going to sit and float and interact beautifully in a mix, where this... we're going to struggle to get to feel like it has any body. So as a bit crusher device, really not particularly interested. As a what we call saturation device, then I think that there's plenty to like about Crush, so long as you can live with the frustration, particularly just of modulation assignment, because they've given us a nice sound. Again, my advice is don't go mixing half and half to merely commit. Then if we now go and up our treble on this, let's grab in a treblifier. We can hear it pumping because of our LFO. We can see that digital noise happening. But that's kind of interesting, and your careful use of filter means that we can actually improve that sound. We can make it much nicer to mix. So in that respect, Crush definitely does what it says it's going to do on the box. That smoothing off is working in its benefit in that sense. If you're looking at this as a saturation type thing, how to take a sound from being rather flat and digital to feeling like it might be a real thing. You know, there's that sort of difference between a VST and a Jupiter 8. The Jupiter 8, when you plug it in, it's not better than a VST. It's got a lot less features, but it's just got a lot of that kind of munging of sound already happening, therefore will tend to sound beautiful in the mix. It will feel kind of 3D and chewy in a good way. This is doing the same thing, taking that rather flat, slightly papery sound and giving it a body and some movement with our LFO. Often I've always been tending to do the good and bad at the beginning, but I figured I might as well do it at the end on this one. And I think you've worked it all out already in that it does sound good. It's made some decisions to make itself sound safer and gooder. And for bit crushing, they may be a little less than purist, but for the average user, that's probably a good decision. For use as a saturation unit like this, then yeah, very wise decision. So it sounds good. It's possible to get very nice results. The drive and filter combination themselves do work well together. The Crush stuff is, as I say, I think technically perhaps not 100% accurate, but what they've given us does work nicely. So I'm going to say, yep, that's fine too. And at free, you can't bitch about the price. Its bad is that there is no level matching. That's not so great. I'm used to that. I'm used to managing my levels and I'm used to checking, but I know a lot of people who sort of grab these kinds of things. Oh, it's free, man. I'm going to be like the most excellent producer. Don't know these things, don't stop to think, and end up going backwards. They make a worse sound, and which puts them in a deeper hole. So seeing the technology's been there for a long time, I think it's a bit of a shame that it's not here. If they decided not to do it for purist reasons, absolutely fine, no argument with that. I think they still probably coulda, shoulda put a button here or here just to sort of say, do you want us to help you with that? I might well leave that button out, but in these situations it should be there, I believe. The fact that we've got no idea with regards to the readouts here and how these assignments of LFO are based on a percentage based upon this. It's too many provisos in one go. Oh, and also, there's no AB. Sorry, not AB. The AB is a bit strange. There's no bypass. I assume whoever made it probably works in a DAW that has a built-in bypass, whether that be a soft or a hard one. I have one here, but I have to go over here when, again, with modern technology, why would there not be a button that allows either a hard bypass or a soft bypass is really nice, as in let's not turn the guts of the thing off. So if there's any sort of delay compensation issue happening, that it still keeps its delay compensation, so there's none of that strange little lurch that can happen with those. Again, it probably should be there. But to me, probably the thing that would kill me on wanting to use this is this very strange use of proviso upon proviso on the LFO assignment. It doesn't change the sound when you get there, but getting there becomes a little unnecessarily complex, because if I decide, okay, that's the right amount for there, move it to here, now the movement's changed, move it to here, now the movement's changed. Now, that's not to say that when you do move from here to here, you wouldn't necessarily be wanting to make the change, but that's far more conventional than this unusual thing. If they can explain a logic as to why this is done oddly, I might buy it and say, you know, that's really smart, but it hasn't felt smart when I've been using it. But again, it's free, so we shouldn't bitch. If you're after a saturation unit of this kind, where you can do anything from the sort of Public Enemy heavy tape, or vinyl tape, MPC compression, this will get you there. It will trade off some of the accuracy of that, I believe, but it'll get you there. No problems at all. As you heard, we've got a nice sound there. If you're after something that will take any instrument or track in your mix and help you just to make it seem a little bit more 3D and moving, this will get you there. At a good price, there are just a few quirky things that you've got to come to terms with. But if you spend your time and you use the device often enough, you'll just get used to that stuff. And then you'll probably wonder why, to me, it seems like an issue. So, nice device, nicely priced, some unusual things, but bearing in mind what it's probably going to be used for, I think there is plenty of positive to be gained from using this doohickey, because you really do see that we can take drum sounds and give them a character that's going to make them work when the mix, or synth sounds. And it's not just rolling off the top, there's a lot more movement. So we can take any synth sound, any sound that we've got in our mix, give it that sort of sense of being an actual thing that hangs in space, which makes it easier to place in a mix. Without this feeling of everything just being sort of sticky taped to the screen right in front of your eyes. That means less need to do this excessive panning routine that just... So you've got all these things that are sort of spread out like this. It's kind of like getting yourself like a 48-inch widescreen single screen and putting your head so close to it that it's just like freaking you out right behind your ears. Good device. Go try it. Tritic. If you're there and of the sound designer mentality, then definitely have a look-see at some of their other things. Irid looked kind of interesting. That was a very digital grain delay reverb kind of thing, but the thing that really grabbed me was Moodle, because it was different, and I got some truly fascinating results from it. If you keep the number of resonators in it reasonably low, it's not too bad on the CPU. If you go up to the full 1,000 they offer you, it gets a little heavy-handed, but I think we probably should expect such a thing. My name again is Benedict for Higher Hertz. There, don't forget, is also higherhertz.com if you have a question, not about support for the device, please, but if you have a question about the material in here, then please ask away, preferably after hitting the subscribe button. It's good to let YouTube know that we are providing something of value, because it helps them present our material to other people. And if it is an audio question, like I'm struggling with my mix because of, I can't answer you unless you actually show me and let me hear what's going on. So grab something like OBS, and exactly as you see here, do a screen recording of your DAW, not holding your phone somewhere near your screen and speakers, because I can't see or hear anything. I will ignore you. Do a proper OBS recording so that I'm hearing and seeing exactly what you're seeing. Show me the problem. Don't show me your cat or whatever. I love cats, but it's not going to help me to solve your problem. Show me the actual issue and explain what you feel is going wrong. And then I'm more likely to be able to help. But go carefully there, because remember, as a professional mix engineer, this is what I get paid to do. But I don't mind devoting part of the day to helping people. Every day, part of my day is devoted to giving advice to help people. Pro bono is important. So, Benedict for Higher Hertz, you have a great day.